So I'm curious to see, first of all, Sarah, as a programmer, as a creator of the Arab Film Club, as a programmer, how do you qualify Arab film? And I'll add to that, do you make a difference between films shot in the Arab world, films shot by Arab directors in Europe or America about subjects that have nothing to do with issues around the Arab world? So
it's a funny question, because I guess it's come up a few times, like, what is an Arab, and especially in terms of, like, in some areas of the world, you have the indigenous people that might now, like, identify as Arab, and that's okay. I personally think it's, for me, it's an Arab-speaking country. So, for example, we had an evening of shorts from the Arab world last year. So I wanted to make it as diverse as possible. So Sudan was in there because, of course, that's an Arabic-speaking country. They might not... Yeah, sort of like the Afro-Arab identity is something I don't know as much about, but I wanted to make the program as inclusive as possible. Then, of course, you have people from the Kurdish community that probably don't identify as Arab for various different reasons. But we had a discussion on a film called Son of Babylon that was by an Iraqi Kurdish filmmaker. So it's quite open. I feel like you could go round in circles and circles and circles talking about semantics and language, and, like, even the idea that, like, we can't use the word Levantine anymore because it's colonial. You can't say Middle East anymore because it's colonial. And I agree up to a point. And then I think sometimes just got to sit back and say, all right, let's just enjoy the art and uncover these really brilliant titles and pieces. And some of the films are, sometimes it can be problematic, where the money's come from. In answer to... Yeah, I'll put it this way. When we first started doing the sessions, I was talking with a friend of mine, Rahad, actually, who's here, and we were just absolutely, completely and utterly fed up as actors playing refugees again and again and again. And they were always written by Europeans, and very often well-meaning. Like, sometimes they weren't trying to marginalise, that community in the slightest. But it just was, like, just full of tropes, and it's just sort of very one-dimensional. So we thought, well, why don't we try and find films and plays that are written by Arabs? And if you identify as an Arab, that's good enough for me. But yeah, that's the rule. It has to be written and directed by an Arab. Yeah. And then we take a lot of suggestions as well. So if someone's recommended a film in good faith, then we try and watch it and have an opinion. And we don't always like everything, and that's fine too. We might have a long discussion about... But it's very diverse. Yeah. But it's very diverse.
Thank you. How about you, Elhum, in your long-standing work programming films from the MENA region?
I mean, it's a really big question. I mean, I echo a lot of the things that you've said, and I think for me, one of the things that matters the most is the intentionality of a film, to kind of understand where the filmmaking was positioned. And that's the thing that I look for the most. And then when you're programming, I mean, I've been programming for different institutions, and, the BFI, so programming for London Film Festival is programming for a very large unknown audience. It could be anyone literally in London or traveling from across the country to come and see the newest films, and these films are going to be in competition with the biggest, most visible films, and so it's about for me it was always about trying to choose also films that were going to, like, smaller films as well, more delicate films, but being able to protect them and give them a kind of bridge to an audience they wouldn't otherwise meet. With Shabak it's slightly different because it's a festival of contemporary Arab culture, so your audience is automatically already interested, and so you can look at things slightly differently. But this question of, like, defining is something that, because in the 10 years that I've been programming also, the definitions have changed, or the words have changed, or we talk of Swana now, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know exactly whether or how I fit into these things, or how the films fit into these things, and does that matter as much as knowing the intention behind them, I suppose, and kind of representation in a slightly broader sense than the kind of strict identities. And also because sometimes identities are kind of given for certain reasons that you don't want to that you don't want to reinforce, I suppose.
No,
I mean, I
that
think one of the
totally
things
makes
that's more important for me, like to say it another way, is like where my red lines are. Like the things that I won't program are a little bit clearer than the things that I will. Maybe that's a better way. So when you speak about where the money comes from, that's something that I would think about. And also about, I suppose, questions of representation, questions of kind of, I mean, not to go into like too tricky territory, but like you mentioned the kind of well-meaning, and I think that can also be a really dangerous space, this kind of like well-meaning ignorance, like wanting to, so that's the kind of thing that I would steer clear from more than, so yeah. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there are things that I probably reflected on to a certain extent programming these films. I know at one point the topic of programming a film by a Tunisian filmmaker who was essentially French came up. Why aren't we? I can't remember who it was, to be honest, but it was a Franco-Tunisian filmmaker working in France, and the film was about France. So for me, it just didn't make any sense.
But was it about Tunisian diaspora in France?
No. It was about you know whichever one I'm talking about. I can't remember why that conversation came up, but yeah, it was something to do with a French. It was like a French film about a French couple, a middle-aged French couple going through a divorce. So it wasn't. It didn't feel relevant at all to what we were trying to show here. If you see what
But
I mean.
that's interesting as well, because it's kind of, for me, that's one of the more interesting things that's happened in the last decade, is that actually filmmakers from the Arab world, or however you want to identify this region, are more and more able to make the films that they want to make, whatever those films are. I remember, for example, 10 years ago when we were programming Bird's Eye Views, focus on Arab women directors, there was this whole conversation similarly about My Brother the Devil by Salih al-Husseini. And for me, actually, that film has a frequency that is very clear. And if you are attuned to that frequency, then you can read it and understand that there is an element in there that really speaks to one part of Sally's identity, or one part of an Egyptian identity, and like diasporic Egyptian identity in London. But in another way, it's very much a London film, and it will always be presented in that way. So I don't know, I think they're quite interesting conversations. And it's funny you bring this up also, because as we were watching, I was reflecting that so Soudade and I have known each other for like 10 years more, and I've programmed all of your films apart from Aziza, because 2010, with that, and and so all of these films, and most recently, your most recent film was made from the UK with UK financing. And so that's a kind of amazing journey to go on, and to kind of see that actually financing from this country would support whatever vision it is that you have, and a film that's in Arabic as well. And similarly, Munia's film, Submarine, was something that I programmed in Shabak in 2017. And so Munia has just wrapped on like she's just directed like 2 episodes of what's it called? Boiling Point? Anyway, which is like a serialized version of the film by Philip Barantini. But so that's amazing in a sense, because it's not necessary, it's her being able to be a director on something she's interested in that doesn't just speak to the fact that she's Lebanese. And so I was thinking about that progression, and thinking that actually that's a really powerful thing. It's not at all an answer to your question, so I'll just stop talking.
No, it's a very good point. It's something funnily enough, it's a question that bugged me much more. I used to act, and that question of just not having to act out typical Arab stories and just being able to act out anything I want, that felt very important at the time. So I totally see how as a filmmaker you're then defined by your work, and you tell the stories you want to tell. I think for this season, what I also wanted to show, which makes me reflect on that, was specific stories from the Arab world. It wasn't just the quality of the filmmaking. I also wanted to tell, I wanted to, through the programming, allow these talented women to tell stories of the current situation. of daily life, of interactions between people going about their business in the wider context of what's happening there, because it was very important for me to not preach to the converted and have I do discussion groups in the cinema with wonderful people, and a lot of them don't know much at all about the Arab world. We've had this chat before, so they're keen to come and watch films from this season to know more about what's going on there. And for me, through the prism of these films, is probably one of the best platforms to do that. So that was also why I think I didn't consider work by an Arab filmmaker that just didn't relate in any way to the Arab world. So thank you, because I think I wanted to say this and it triggered that thought. Talking about financing, actually, that's a very, very good point.
Is it? Sorry, I don't know whether that's super boring for everyone.
No, it is, because it's the production. I'm always fascinated to see the extent to which co-productions and so on allow films to happen. I'm not a filmmaker and I'm not a producer, so I come at it from an outsider. I have to say, I'm always amazed at how many films come out of Palestine. In random selections of films from the Arab world, there will be loads coming from Palestinians, and I always think, how are the circumstances around which you're all making films? Some countries don't produce as much. So I was wondering, Soudade, for example, from the perspective of a filmmaker, how do you work with co-producers around the world? And I'll come to you, Elhum, as well, because you're a producer.
I think, as you said, Elhum, it changed from one film to another, and the journey changed with where I started in Syria. So I started with documentary film with local or Arab TV channels like Al Jazeera documentary channel, and I was always director, producer of my films. But then when I wanted to make fiction, there's absolutely no financing for fiction films in the Arab region. If you are not, we have few grants, small grants that don't finance a film, that can't make a film, or a few grants that help, but can't make a full film. The only way in Syria to make film is actually by a national organization of the cinema, which it means you should be a member of the political party of the government, it means you will never make a fiction film. so basically, we have as a Syrian filmmakers, independent fiction filmmaker, to make our films not only via grants and also via co-production. And this is the paradox, that we have to tell our stories from our voice and our perspective while searching for financing always from Europe. So my first fiction film was a co-production with France, and with a long journey of co-production with my sister Amira here in the audience. So we made a fiction film. It was very difficult to make at that time. No one wanted to finance a fiction film. When we started to make it 2011, most of the financing was for documentary, because this is what they wanted. Wanted a document of reality and not a story by a Syrian of the reality of how we felt and the emotion about it. So it was a very long journey of 7 years to find financing to make it, but we made it with a very small budget. With a very small budget of co-production between our production based in Lebanon, me and my sister, and the French co-production. This film here, Nuzuh, this one, the short fiction here was very small budget, and I think that's why it gave me a lot of liberty, because we didn't have any finance. They give us a small budget, do whatever you do, and just I make this film. Because if I went for financing, then they would ask me to make the refugee look more refugee. This is something even with the first film, like, can you make your film more Syrian? It's like, they are Syrian, speaking Syrian. It's in the Syrian world. How you can make it more Syrian? So I didn't have any question. I just gave me the small money. If you manage to make a film, it's good. So I had two amazing actors, and we made this film, and it represents, one. Part of displaced or refugee Syrians that we don't see and are not financed because it doesn't fit the narrative of stereotype of all the news of what you want to see or how Syrian should look like. And then the last film I made, which will be released in UK, and it was released in Switzerland and Belgium and Italy, this summer in UK and France. It was financed by BFI and Film 4 when I moved here, and was also with grants that I also had from the Arab region. So I kept this because I always wanted to have also a financing from the Arab region from my film. I think it's important as a filmmaker always to have the financing coming from different resources, and it helped to make certain balance in the film. And to push, especially what I do is I usually develop the film alone to get certain independent to make the film like far away from any influences of what we have to look like or what something. And then once the script is ready and everything, I go find financing.
Thank you. The names of
so my first feature film is on Netflix now. It's The Day I Lost My Shadow, and Aziza also is on Netflix. There's a short fiction film, Besieged Bread, also the two short and one feature on Netflix UK here. Nuzuh was in BFI London Film Festival and will be soon in cinema. Yeah.
Catch it here.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you very much. And just Elhum, you as a producer, if you could just tell me more about your experience producing films from the region, and if that's changed in the last few years. What have you seen emerge? What trends have you seen emerge?
Well, I mean, as a producer, I really follow this kind of rule of developing yourself before bringing in financing. Generally speaking, the people who are making decisions on where money goes are very far from the act of filmmaking. They're very far from the responsibility of the story that you're telling. They're very far from anything really that you're dealing with, and you're living with it. And ultimately the film that you're making is like something that you'll produce and that will be with you forever, for your whole life, whereas for them it's probably just part of a portfolio for that year. So yeah, I think the relationship with funding is challenging because you need to find the right people, but equally you do need to get money to make films. Films are very expensive, particularly if you're working in a kind of longitudinal way, like both of us do, developing over time and really understanding your material or why you're making a film and trying to make it in the best way. So, I mean, I was just telling you, actually, I'm a very old school producer. I don't know whether it's quite possible to do things in this way anymore in this country. There's a limited amount of money. We have a government that's not very interested in financing culture or anything, it seems. So it's a challenging time. I think one of the things that does really make a difference is showing how, as audiences, I think that we make choices about what matters. So, when Soudade's film is out at the cinema, go and see it on the first weekend and make sure that it's kind of, that it sits somewhere alongside all the other films that are out, because that is the thing that will encourage financiers to say, oh, they know what they're doing. We didn't understand that script when it first came in, but there's something there that maybe we didn't see. And I think it's coming back to even just the idea of this season. I think 10 years ago when I started programming films from this region, there was a lot more, I don't want to say resistance, but nervousness, I guess, about foreign language films. Because actually this is what the films that I curate are generally called. It's not films from a region or another region. It's like films that aren't in English. And that's the thing that people are most nervous about, the idea of subtitles. When I say people, sorry, I mean like decision makers are nervous about subtitles in this country. But actually that's disproved over and over again, whether it's through Swedish noir or the fact that this cinema is completely full. So I think we make decisions also, and we can impact on these kind of decision spaces. Again, I haven't quite answered your question. I've danced around.
No, you bring up a very, very interesting point. Yeah, it's very cyclical, isn't it? Hopefully the popularity of the films brings in more funding, encourages more producers.
Could I possibly add something? It's just funny hearing some of your experiences, because I was talking to an Afghani filmmaker the other day who's made a brilliant short film that has the Taliban features in it, let's say in the backdrop of the story, and he was saying how everyone wanted to get their teeth into it because it was about the Taliban, and eventually he had to turn down so much funding to say, no, as an Afghani filmmaker, I have to make this on my own terms, and he ended up financing it entirely himself, and it's going on to win lots of awards. But also, just because you mentioned Palestine, and I know there's so many brilliant films that are coming out of Palestine, some of which are being funded by like Doha Film Institute, and many other organizations, but I was working with a filmmaker recently called Wissam Al-Jafari, and he's from the Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem, and he's now an award-winning filmmaker, but his first ever short, which won awards and was screened at Cannes, he made on zero budget in the refugee camp. He didn't have lights. Yes, exactly.
So ambience.
He didn't have lights, so he asked all his neighbours in the camp to put their lights on to shoot the night scenes, and everyone in the camp was like an extra or made tea for the crew. So like I feel like the films coming out of Palestine itself, even though it's a tiny little slither of a thing on the map, unfortunately, like the films themselves are very diverse, you know, from zero budget to reasonably high budget and sort of supported by different organizations. So I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the film might be available online. I would really encourage you to watch it. It's very, very good. It's about sound design. Ambiance by Wissam Al-Jafari. Thank you for that. I'm aware that I've been talking quite a bit, so I wanted to open it up to the audience. Do people have any questions for our guests, comments? Thank you so much. Very kind colleague will pass the mic to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Very good. Thank you so much for organizing this. This is just wonderful. I suppose I would like to comment and then perhaps ask 2 questions if there is enough time. When you were talking about the constraints of filmmaking, that reminded me of, first of all, I'm a PhD student that is researching gender representation in the English subtitles of Saudi feminist films. And so when I heard, that's a long title. Thank you, that's a long title. When I heard subtitles, I was like, yeah, whoa, finally, wonderful translation. But just before I ask my question, so the 3 films that I'm researching is Wajda, The Perfect Candidate, and Baraka Meets Baraka, that's on Netflix. The first 2 are directed by the first female director, Haifa Al-Mansour, and she directed Wajda in 2012 when she was in a van using a walkie-talkie or talkie-walkie, whatever you call that, because women weren't allowed to shoot a film in Saudi back then. So that, you know, it's amazing that despite all those constraints, stories are still being told, and I think that's something that is very admirable. Now, to the question, I suppose I would like to ask that to the director, and perhaps you're very welcome to share your opinions as well. Are subtitles considered in any, I suppose, phase of the production or the dialogue writing, in terms of how meaning is not only, you know, transferred linguistically, but also visually and audibly, and you know, through all those geopolitically ways, or is it perhaps considered by anyone who's not the subtitler themselves, and or is the impact of translation, I suppose, ever considered in on how it lands on the audience, specifically people who are not familiar with the Arab world, doesn't have much context. So yes, I'll start with that first and be able to give everyone else a chance to ask questions as well. Thank you so much.
I think, you know, just from my point of view, I think maybe as program curator you would know more, but for me as a filmmaker, a film director, I always feel like we need subtitles, of course, to get a wider audience, but we know that every time someone is looking down to the screen, they're missing something. So you see the reaction different from one country to another. You see it like, I see people having more laugh of fun when they're watching. They don't need to follow the word and just going with the character, with the image and stuff, but we need it. But I think it's a complex relationship we have. It's like translation, which is trahison. Like it's like we have to reflect the information, but we know that we always lose something. We need it to communicate, and I'm happy to have subtitle and not dubbing. Thank God we're not doing this. I hate dubbing. It's like it's fun to see for 1 second, like in Italy they dubbed it to Italian language. It's like, oh, it's Syrian film in Italian language. It looks funny, but I think I believe in voice of the actors. Nothing can like the moment when we are on set and the emotions they had, and so we can't replace this with a dubbing voice. So we need subtitle. We lose and we win at the same time, and it's the same as translation, I think.
I mean, as a translator, also, I mean, I think the process of subtitling with filmmaking is so much more complex than anyone realizes. It's so time consuming because it's not just a case of the words, but it's how it's like the speed at which they move, like which words are on screen. And there are increasingly filmmakers who play with subtitles in terms of, there are languages that their sentence structure is different, so the subtitle for one thing is going to come up on screen while something else is being said, and then it's so people who understand both languages and are kind of looking at the subtitles are like, that's not right, and then it's corrected, and it's a tricky thing. And I think it's been interesting to see increasingly filmmakers also play with that a little bit and see it as a space of creation too. Obviously, I mean, I produce mainly documentaries, so I don't know how much you can be creative with subtitles in that space, but I think it's for me it's like this untapped creative, it's like the next creative space somehow. But I think it really is it's also like a portal into spaces that you might otherwise not feel you have access to, and that's been a really carefully considered space, definitely, and by a lot more people than simply the director. I think there's a whole range of people that go into figuring out subtitles. It's incredibly time consuming.
Yeah, just a small thing. It's something that comes up time and time again in the Arab Film Club when we're discussing the subtitles. Like some things just literally don't translate. Like, ta'aburni, like you bury me, and then it's translated as I love you. Or like there's just so many things that will never translate. Sometimes if there's a sort of really funny insult in Arabic, like you son of a shoe, and the translates just like, oh, you're, well, I don't want to swear, but I'm not fluent speaker, but you do lose so much of the beauty and the humour. So I'm fascinated in translation actually, and how what gets lost, and how it's such a skill. I don't know how people do it. Or yatik on air for you, like you just can't translate those things like thanks or something. So yeah.
But there's something kind of nice in that as well, in that there's also there's the space for the initiated, in a sense. Like there's a kind of inner circle and there's an outer circle. And I think, maybe you have to earn complete understanding of something. I don't think that even if you have language, you fully understand something the first time you see it. And maybe something you don't speak the language of, or you don't fully understand, it's an invitation to watch it again. And, that's how you'd look at poetry, for example. You wouldn't assume that you understand it the first time you see it. You shouldn't assume that just because there are subtitles you can read, you now understand exactly what this film is about. Subtitles are a bridge, and it's an invitation, but I don't think it's complete, and all films are like that. I mean, rewatching Submarine, which I've programmed multiple times, I was like, oh, I completely forgot this bit, or oh, I didn't realize this, or oh, it's strange, maybe it was an entirely different film. And it's not the first time I felt that about films that I've programmed. And it's really interesting how you read different things depending on where you're at in life, or in the world, or in your day. And I think it's also good to remember that when we think about the kind of the gift of the maybe. It's I don't think it's a loss. I think it's more like something in between.
I wanted to ask a question about finances / decision makers. You gave the example of receiving this kind of interesting artistic advice about making a film more Syrian, or making refugees look more like refugees, or what have you. So I just was curious, what do people think those people are trying to do with those comments? Do they think that that's a way to make the film artistically better, or are they trying to make it more commercial? What's going on in their heads, basically?
Maybe I think it's something we will, there's someone said, a critic said, we call it a struggle, we should call it negotiation. It's a non-stop negotiation to get the story. Don't forget you're getting financing from the West for stories from the Middle East, and from your vision. It's a different culture, different gaze. So to have your story told, and with this financing, this non-stop negotiation and non-stop pushing and asking and fighting to get your story done. It's not easy. You can make easy film and get easy financing, adapting the gaze, which is, but you lose yourself. You lose something. And sometimes, for me at least, I say I don't know if I'm stubborn or I choose a difficult road. I told you, but the first film, it took me 7 years of financing. While there was a lot of financing for Syrian films, they wanted films about Syria, but they wanted films that just a document for reality, an explanation for the West what's happening. We have only one function as a filmmaker: to explain, to narrate, to simplify a very complex reality. And we also have to represent the culture, the religion, ethnicity, and everything. So that's why they ask you to be more Syrian or more something, because they want a representation and not a personal and team individual story, artistic work. This is a constant struggle between it. And you get it by dialogue, by struggle, by writing more story, by making also, supporting each other, finding good producer who believe in you, finding finances that you believe in you. It's not easy to make a film. It's a whole village to make a film. We don't make a film alone, but it's a constant struggle to make it. Being here is not making it even easier. Even I'm grateful that, like, moving here, I managed to make my film. But it's always a struggle. How to tell our story? What is, how to tell it without falling in the trap of saying it to simplify. I think because I'm talking about as a Syrian, there certain desires for Syrian that films that should explain all Syria. And there's no film that explains Syria. You can't explain 10 years of war in one film. And it's very strange because I don't ask a British film to explain all Brexit and all things happening in UK, but they ask me to understand and say, and this is, the problem is, then you have to simplify a lot, and the human being will be less complex. And we just, as we go to films from around the world with open heart to understand and knowing that we're missing information, but we want, and we going to the extra step to understand the complex human being, we should ask people to go with us. So we should believe this audience will do this. As the programming here, for me, like seeing those 4 movies with humor from very difficult, from very difficult situation. Lebanon was collapsed. I witnessed the collapse of Lebanon, Sudan, and Palestine, and Syria, 4 countries deep in in free fall. But we managed to tell our story. So I was happy to watch the film today. Thank you. Yeah.
Or maybe name your worst, i.e. most cliched, even if well-meaning, film representing refugees.
I was kicked out from a cinema once with my friend, and it was a very, but I won't say, of course, that because I respect, no, I can't, but it was a very award-winning film about refugee, and we were 2 Syrian, and we were like, no, you can't. No, it's refugee in general, around the world, refugee, and we look, it's how, it's, it's when we are a stereotype, and it's a long and luckily we are diverse in this world. Maybe these films that I laugh at, and for me it's very simplistic. Someone else needs it, so I'm not saying it shouldn't be made. But my problem is when those movies are the only movies made. We see a lot, for example, like when she said, like, can you, for example, film about refugee. Me as a Syrian, was a lot. We are very diverse, look very different. Our film should represent this. If you see film from a refugee, they want it one color, one look, one thing. How it very, and it's actually erasing the. I don't know if erasing in English. It's erasing the diversity. We are mosaic of Middle East. The country, from one country to another, we're different. The accent is different. We don't, and the language are different. The culture is different. And to make it as one, and look, it was very. So, imagine this with one country is the same. So, I'm not saying. For me, I get angry when I saw this movie, and I think also Sarah, as an actress, when she has to play and only the role of stereotype we have. To play, and that's why it's very difficult to make our movie, because there are non-evident movie about what refugee on which agenda, and we are saying. Sorry, I'm mumbling.
No, I mean, I'd rather speak about films that I want everyone to see.
Exactly, me too.
Because luxury. My colleague tells me that if you are to have a bit of time in our lovely bar, we should wrap it up. And I really want you to be able to enjoy that time, and for the people that have not been here before to enjoy this wonderful cinema. A couple of things to flag before we wrap up. Elhum, you have a season coming up that I want you to tell the audience here.
Through July, there will be a focus retrospective of Youssef Chaheen's work at the BFI. We're screening 18 of his films. There are a number of introductions. There's a special introduction to the whole season. Chaheen was like the most prolific Egyptian director, working from the 50s until the early 2000s. He made over 40 films. It's amazing to be able to share so many of them with a UK audience. There's a range of his early films, his kind of epic reimaginings, his kind of socialist reality kind of reflections on Egypt at different points of his life as it was kind of going through quite seismic changes. But I mean, if you don't know Chaheen, he is like the most wonderful collage kind of different, like a love of early Hollywood meets the kind of golden age of Egyptian cinema meets the kind of Italian neo-realist, like a cinephile who's obsessed with Hamlet, who loves song and dance. He was the person who first cast Omar Sharif. Sorry, suddenly I always get confused between Chaheen himself and Sharif. But anyway, like the whole of the Egyptian star system like runs through his films. It's so much fun, and it will be amazing to see on the big screen. So do join us for that.
Yeah, fine.
Through July.
That's fantastic. It's really good to know. Thank you very much. All I'll do is flag our upcoming screenings. There's a very late one that we only just put on the website, I think yesterday. So I'm really pushing that one. This Memory Box. There was one screening of it, so we added another screening of it on Saturday. If anyone wants to dodge the coronation, come and watch Memory Box. It's a really good film if you want to understand what happened in Lebanon in the recent years. And it's only £5. So that's really cool. And tomorrow we've got Blue Kaftan with Mariam Tousani, who's going to come and do a Q&A here with us. For those of you who can catch it. And it will be followed by Kapaneum, Nadine Nabaki's quite harrowing film. And we'll have a little live recording of a discussion with a journalist, Layla Latif, who will be joining us here. Recently arrived from Sudan in quite dramatic circumstances. I don't know if anyone saw her Guardian article about that. So, yeah. Yes, we're going to plug something else quickly. That double bill tomorrow is a 2-for-1 offer as well, so do check it out. And yes, Sarah, also coincidentally during this
yeah,
season.
so it doesn't
showing
clash with
Fatha.
anything that's programmed here as part of the Maharajat Festival, but the Arab Film Club, in collaboration with the Bethlehem Cultural Festival, are putting on a screening of Farha, which is one of the sort of first mainstream film about the Nakba. That's on the 18th of May, 6 p.m, Prince Charles Cinema, and the director and writer is flying over from Jordan for a Q&A. So yeah, please do come if we'd love to see you there. It's, yeah, to remember and raise awareness about the Nakba. The 18th of May. Yeah. The 18th of May.
Prince Charles, right across the room.
Thank you.
Close enough. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll let you all go and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks for coming in. Please come back for the rest of the season. And thank you, everyone.